in pelvic health, we will still see the traditional knee, foot, and ankle cases because they also play a role in what your pelvis is also looking like and how the function is too. And so just as the way an ACL tear will affect the way you're able to walk, run, stay balanced, a vaginal tear with birth also affect the way you're able to pass a bowel movement, you're able to pee, are you having any sort of leakage front or back, and are you able to tolerate any sort of penetration, which can then also impair your quality of life, daily function, just as much as an ACL tear would too. If you can imagine this Coke can cylindrical type shape, that is what makes up your core. And so pelvic floor being included in that, men who, let's say, hold their breath when they're weightlifting or just anything in general that can lead into breath holding, we can start to see increased pressure in the abdominal cavity, which can then lead to hernias, men or women. But that can also warrant that system of which makes up your core. There is an imbalance there of which can also lead to, if there's increased laxity or pressure on the abdominal wall from chronic constipation issues, chronic straining from constipation, breath mechanics when exercising, if you tend to be a breath holder, that can cause either weakening or increased pressure on the pelvic floor of the abdominal wall, which can then lead to later issues like incontinence, pelvic pain, hernias, prolapse, any sort of those things can lead into why your pelvic floor might be talking to you a little bit more. Given our graphic description of this tearing process, think of, so if you're at the beach and you step on a sharp shell and your foot kind of caves around that shell as a guarding protective mechanism, our body senses that a tissue threat has been introduced to the system. And so in response to that, your tissues guard and protect to then tell you to walk away from that sharp shell. So back to the vaginal tearing example, the vaginal tear is seen as that tissue threat. So a threat has been introduced to the system. In response to that, tissues will guard and protect, which can then impair function on the pelvic floor muscles. And so when you do Kegels, if your tissue's already in that guarding protective state, you're pretty much just taking a contracted muscle and just giving it even more contractions, and you're making it a little bit more irritable. So that might not be your best option. A pelvic floor exam, it's not like at the gynecologist where your foot are on a speculum and your pelvis is like, hey everyone, what's up? Take a look at me. We drape your pelvis, and we want to make sure that you are in the most comfortable spaces possible in order to have an internal exam, because some people are really uncomfortable with it. It's a sensitive area, totally understandable, from wanting a little bit more, covering, draping, whatever you need to make yourself feel comfortable in that space. Something that we commonly see with children is either bedwetting or urinary leakage throughout the day, or a little bit more of a harder time with potty training, or chronic constipation. Your kids who are eating chicken nuggets and fries for every single meal. That might affect the way they're able to evacuate their bowels. And so we want to get that shit moving.
So to speak, yes.
Quite literally.
Yes. If you tend to be a breath holder, diastasis also can happen in men.
Yeah, I think it happened to me like a little bit ago.
Yeah.
No, I gotta
So
hit the
thinking about
gym.
men who and women who either went through a period of significant weight loss after a period of time, they can have a diastasis too, along with our chronic breath holders. So how the diastasis can affect you is going back to our Coke can cylindrical type shape, where we have the abdominal wall, the pelvic floor muscles, the back, and the diaphragm. That balance of how all those muscles are working together might be thrown off a little bit if you have a significant diastasis. When you, especially postpartum, if you feel like, I gotta suck it in, hold my belly tight, all of those things can also feed into increased excess pressure on the pelvic floor too. If you tend to have some holding patterns in your belly because you're trying to keep it tight after you had a baby, but then also if you're struggling with urinary leakage or urgency, think about the increased pressure that's also being put on the bladder if you tend to be a belly holder. So those are things that we also look at mechanically, because those are some things that can also play with that balance of how all of the pelvic floor muscles, your belly, your back, and your diaphragm are all working together to support bowel, bladder, sexual function, along with overall day-to-day function.